Hey folks, today I'm going to demonstrate to you the use of closers in Golang. Before I start though, why am I talking about Golang in the context of DevOps interviews, right? The reason for that is nowadays when you have a series of DevOps interviews, often, more often than not, you're going to get a coding interview. And when you do, you're more likely to get a programming coding test and not like a Terraform or uh, Kubernetes test, because that takes some setup on the interviewer side. So it's easier to test somebody on coding because you can just do it almost on anywhere. It's super. There's no setup needed, right? Because of that, now you can choose your language. I happen to be learning Golang right now, so I'm demoing that. If you're starting out or you haven't invested a whole lot into a programming language, I would highly recommend you use Golang because it is easy to learn and it is super powerful and super fast. And it is often used in startups and sometimes used in DevOps automation. So, having said that, please subscribe to my channel. When I see my subscribers number go up, it gets me more motivated because I know now, then I know that it's helping somebody. Let's get started. So, first of all, what is a closer function? First of all, for the longest time, I thought it closes something like a file, right? That is not the case. In this context, it's talking about enclosing a function. In fact, it's enclosing an anonymous function. I made another video about anonymous functions. Please look that up, or anybody else's video for that matter. You have to understand an anonymous function first. It's actually not that difficult. It's just a function without a name. But and that part is not so difficult to understand. But once you get into closer, it gets a little tricky. It took me a good while to understand what a closer is, and I'm going to demo that right now. Um, and after that, it gets a bit more complicated with callbacks and whatnot. But at least closer, I understand enough to show you what that's all about, right? So let's get started. So first of all, func main. Now, inside the func main, first of all, I'm going to define a variable. Let's just A equals, let's say 10, right? Now, this is where the closer comes in. So closer, first of all, in the anonymous function, and you're going to see this in a minute, inside the anonymous function, there's a reference to a variable, A in this case, that is not passed on to the function, which is kind of weird, right? How is it that a function is using a variable that's not even passed on to it? That's because it's enclosed in this main function. This main function is enclosing the other function, right? You can think of a box, right? So outside the small box, which is the anonymous function, is the big box, which is the main function. And in between, there's a variable. So A is then passed on to, A is then accessible to this anonymous function. So here we go. So first of all, we're going to give an anonymous function and assign to a variable, even though that variable is actually not a variable. It's actually a function. It's not integer. It's not floating point. That variable is actually of type function. So like this. So closer, right, is the name of the variable we're going to give it, right? And just like any other variable, we're going to use this format. Then we're going to say func, which takes no arguments at all, right? It does not take any arguments. It's returning an integer, fine, right? And we're going to say, hey, return A. What the heck? Because you see, A is not passed on to this because this function is embedded into this big enclosing function, hence the name closer, right? I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly. It can access this variable A. Now, okay, that's all good. Now, what is it complaining about? It's complaining that closer is declared but not used. Okay, fine. We're going to print it. We're going to say, hey, print closer. and it will give me a wrong answer, and it's a really good learning point. So I'm going to let it give me the wrong answer. Why is it complaining now? Not, oh, print. It should be print ln. Okay, it's still complaining. Let's save that. Okay, it's no longer it is still complaining. It's a warning, so maybe it will work and give us the wrong answer. So let's run that function. And you see, it gave me an error memory address. Why? Because closer is a variable, and that happens to be a function. That function lives in the memory. I got the memory address. Now, how do I fix this? We say, okay, remember this function doesn't take any arguments, so I haven't called the function. I only call the name of the function. So now if I do that, that means I'm calling the function. Now, when I call the function, instead of giving me the memory address, it's going to give me the actual output of the function, which will return the value of a. Let's save that and run that, and we get 10. In fact, if we wanted to, we can actually return something else like a plus 2. Save that, and I should get 12. Again, the main point of this is this anonymous function, which has no name, does not take any variables, and yet it is able to access a variable outside this function in the bigger box, right? And it is able to deal with it. In fact, later we will see in another videos that you can actually modify these variables, and you can do that. And that's the next step before you get into callbacks and whatnot, right? So anyway, that's the summary of it. We have an anonymous function that is accessing a variable outside its context and able to and deal with that. The reason you do this in the first place is because sometimes, this is one example of many, is that sometimes a function needs to deal with a state that needs to be available outside it, right, outside the function. So you retain, and in another video I talked about the heap versus stack. When you do a function, it goes to a stack, and that stack disappears as soon as the function is closed. Any variables that is used by the function is no longer available. This is a way to save something outside the function. That's the whole idea of the closure. Closure means it encloses in a bigger box, and that's what you have. Hope you found this video useful, and I will see you in the next video.